Great work so far in building out our application. We've just got a little bit of work left, the profile and edit profile pages. And before we move on to that, I just want to clean up a couple of things. First of all, I forgot to, within the post component, remove the follow suggestions import, which we don't need. And then back within navbar, we have in search, the loading state. We aren't using the set loading function, so we can remove that and get rid of those two warnings in our console. Now, before moving on to the final stage of building out our app, our last two pages, I want to touch upon an important concept that we haven't covered in any previous part of the course, and that is how to performantly load our components. One important thing to note whenever we're loading a given page is that there are many components that are page specific, and whenever a user is visiting our app, they might be visiting one page or another, might be entering the app from one page or another, and they're not going to need to have components that aren't specific to that page loaded. For example, on our post page, we don't need all of the JavaScript that's responsible for our feed post component loaded. Since we're not on that page, we don't need that. So the question is, how do we load components only when we need them? Well, we can use a feature in React known as lazy loading to lazily load our components, or in other words, load our components only when we need them. So only when we're on the feed route do we want to load the feed post component, and when we're on our, say, post page, do we want to load the component for the individual post. So we're going to apply lazy loading specifically to our feed post component. So let's head all the way back to our feed page. And lazy loading is a really simple two-step process. The first step is we want to use a different pattern, a different syntax for importing the component that we want to lazily load. So instead of importing it like this, no matter what, here within our feed, we're going to use a special function called react.lazy. And within lazy, we want to import feed post within the return of a function. So in that return, we're going to import, then between a set of curly braces, between a set of parentheses, we're going to include the path to our feed post. So we can just copy that over from what we had previously. And then we're going to get a reference to this component that's going to be available within a variable which will give the same name, feed post. And note that this needs to be at the very bottom underneath all of our imports, otherwise we're going to get an error. The imports need to appear before any variable that we declare or any function within our file. So react.lazy is going to be responsible for lazily loading this component only when we need it, only when we're on the feed page. But due to the fact that it's lazily loaded, it's going to take a certain period of time before we can actually use this. We can't use it immediately, even when we go to the feed page. Or I should say, it's not going to be displayed immediately due to the nature of it being lazily loaded. So the way that we handle this behavior, and note that we're using feed post down here, the way that we handle this behavior of having to wait a certain period of time before our component is displayed is we use a special component that React gives us called react.suspense. And we need to wrap this around feed post and wherever we're using it. So react.suspense is now what's going to accept the key prop here, but additionally it's going to have a prop called fallback. This means as we're lazily loading this component, we need to show a fallback. We need to show something else while we're in the process of doing so. So for right now, I'm just going to add a set of fragments with the text loading so we can see what takes place. So let's save feed here, and we're going to navigate back to the home page, to the feed page, and we see loading, loading, loading very quickly. So we see that text, but naturally we want something a little bit more presentable, a little bit nicer. And note that when we go to the home page, to the feed page, we see this nice shimmer effect. we see a kind of skeleton of the post, and then all of its data, the post itself, becomes visible. So for our fallback, instead of just including some text, let's create a component that's going to be the feed post skeleton that we laid out in our initial sketch of the application. So we're going to head to the feed folder within components and build our feed post skeleton. So we'll grab classes, and this really is just going to consist of a number of divs. We'll start with div with the class of container. Within it, we'll have the skeleton for the header up here at the top. It's going to consist of an avatar and a username area, as well as a secondary text or a name area. So we'll have a div, the class avatar skeleton, or sorry, header skeleton, and then within that div, which will just be a single tag with the class avatar skeleton, and then underneath that a div with the class header text skeleton. We'll include our two text lines. So first we'll have a div, the class primary text skeleton, and another one underneath it of secondary text skeleton. And then of course we're going to have our media area underneath, which gives us that nice shimmer. So underneath header skeleton, underneath that div, we'll have a div with the class media skeleton. So this is what we'll bring into our feed file as our fallback. Feed post skeleton, we'll import that. And now we see a much nicer effect as our feed post comes into view as it's lazily loaded. And we can create the same thing for our post component. Now note that we're not going to be lazily loading our post component. We will show an appropriate post skeleton when we're fetching the post data in the final version of our app. And really, like so many of our other components, we can copy a lot of its elements. We're just going to copy all of the returned divs from feed post skeleton and apply them to the post skeleton to its returned JSX. Now this is going to be ordered a little bit differently. It's going to be a tiny bit different. First of all, we're going to have the media skeleton up at the top within container, and then the header skeleton, that whole div is going to be wrapped in an enclosing div with no class. And additionally, we're going to change up the styles a little bit. We're going to need to use the use media query hook to use a special media query here, specifically for a min width of 900. So we're just going to add one inline style, and if the media query matches, we're going to put the resulting boolean in this matches variable, and we're going to apply an inline style to the container, and we're specifically going to be changing the grid template columns property. If this matches, if our window has a min width of 900 pixels, we're going to have the two parts of our skeleton, the two columns of our skeleton, be in the first column 600 pixels and in the second 335 pixels. So let's save post skeleton, and if we navigate to the post component, we can import that. And we can simulate loading here. So if loading, let's return post skeleton. And let's say we show this for a couple of seconds, so we can just add a quick set timeout. First we'll declare a loading variable where that's true, or we'll actually need to use a state variable. We'll have a loading state variable and set loading, and this will be initially true. Then after about 2 seconds we'll set loading to false. We just want to see this post skeleton for a couple of seconds to simulate loading. So we see our lazily loaded feed post skeleton, and then when we open an individual post, we see for a couple of seconds that brief view. And we see the same when we go to the individual post page. The next page that we're going to be working on is the profile page. So we can see it right here in Instagram. This is going to display all of the user's information for whose profile we're looking at. It's going to include their avatar, their profile picture, as well as their username up top. If we're looking at our own profile, we're going to see this edit profile button to edit our profile information. And then we're also going to have this gear button, which will give us all of these actions that we see in this dialog. Underneath that, for every user, we're going to have the count of their posts, count of their followers, and the number of users that they're following. And we're also going to show their name, bio, and website underneath in this area here. And then underneath that, so this area that we've been looking at is kind of the header of our profile. And then underneath that is all of our tabs. The tabs to see the user's posts, or if we're looking at our own profile, to see all of the posts that we've saved. So we're going to begin by creating the basic structure of this page. So we'll head to Pages and then Profile. And we'll begin by grabbing classes. Now note that within the profile page, within the title element in the head, that we have the user's name, and then right after that a set of parentheses, and then their handle, which will include the @ symbol and then their username. So for the layout's title prop, we want to use a template string, and we're going to bring in the default current user to get the profile user's information. So for now, we're just going to display our information. So we'll first insert default current user dot name, and then after that, in parentheses, we'll include this outside the $ and curly braces, parentheses @ and then insert the username. Now as for the structure within the profile page, we're going to begin with a div, which will have the class container. And then following that, we're going to have a hidden element, a hidden component. And we're actually going to have two separate hidden components. Let me import this first. We're going to have, first of all, a view for the larger screens, desktop and tablet devices. So you can see the following here. We're going to have this area for the profile picture. This is going to be a separate component, a shared component called profile picture. The area up top, this is going to be called the profile name section. Underneath that, the post count section, and beneath that, the name bio section. These are all components that we're going to create locally within the profile page component, the profile page file. But if we make our view smaller, say for a mobile device, we see that the order of things flips a bit. Our button here gets bigger within the profile name section, and the order of the post count section and the name bio section flip. So first of all, we want to show this mobile view when our larger view is hidden. So first of all, we'll say hidden SM up. So this is going to be for the smaller screen sizes, and it's going to be hidden when we're above a small size, only visible on an extra small size. And then for the second hidden component, this is going to apply for the larger screens, and this is going to be hidden on the XS size. So it's going to be hidden for XS down. So for the larger screen view, Within hidden, we'll start with a card component. And this will have the class of card large. Then we're going to bring in our profile picture from our shared folder in components. So we'll import profile picture from components shared profile picture. And we'll insert that directly within card. Then we're going to have a card content component, which we'll import. And this will have the class card content large. Now here we're going to have our profile name section. So we'll go ahead and create all of these components locally. Profile name section. And for right now, I'm just going to have it return a fragment with the component's name, profile name section. I'll do this for all of the local components. So we'll just copy this. And the next one will be post count section. And the last will be name bio section. So here within card content, we have profile name section. Then after that we have post count section. And then name bio section. And then for the smaller view within the second hidden component, we're also going to begin with a card, but this is going to have the class card small. Then it's going to have a card content component within it with no class. Then it'll have a section element inside with the class name section small. Then we're going to have a profile picture inside that. See a profile picture. We're still going to have the profile name section up top. And this is all going to be within our section element, but outside of this section element, we're going to have our name bio section right here. Name bio section. And then outside of card content, we'll have the post count section. Now let's take a quick look at that. So right now everything looks kind of smushed together, but we see that our breakpoint, our different breakpoints are working, our hidden components are working for those breakpoints. So let's begin in filling out the profile picture component. We'll head over there, and simply put, this is going to accept three props: size, the size of the picture, the image itself, the picture itself, and then whether we're the owner of the account, the profile for which we're showing the component. So let's create that first. Let's say that we are the owner. We are the owner of this particular profile that we're looking at. So we'll create a variable called isOwner and set it to true. And we want to pass isOwner down as a prop to both of our profile picture components. Now, the size is going to be optional. We don't have to provide that. The image we can set to just a default value for now. So I'm going to head to my data file, and I'm going to copy my profile image for the default user. Or there should be one also for the current user. So you can copy that. Now note, if an image isn't provided, we want to handle that case. So sometimes we're going to be uploading a picture, a new picture for ourselves, and we won't be able to show an image at that moment. So what we'll do is we're going to check within our component. First we'll create the structure of our component and check within that component as to whether we have an image. If we do, we'll show it. Otherwise, if we don't, we're just going to show a person icon, kind of a default or a no content icon for our image. So we'll begin by returning a section element, and this will have the class section. Within that, we'll add a ternary to check to see if we have an image. If we do, we'll display it within a div that'll have the class of wrapper. So within the div, we'll have an image element where the source will be set to image, the alt text will be set to user profile, and the class name will be classes.image. And then for the else case, if we don't have an image, we can copy that same div, but inside of it, we're going to include an icon from the Material UI library called person, and it's going to be from @materialui/icons. And note that this icon is going to have the class of person. And for isOwner and size, we want to pass down both of these values to our use profile picture styles hook. There are going to be some slightly different styles according to these two prop values. Now back in profile, for our smaller view, we want to make the profile picture just a little bit smaller, so we're going to set a size value of 77 pixels. So taking a look at that, we have a very big avatar, a very big profile picture for our large view, but when we get down to a mobile size, that becomes a little bit smaller. Next, we're going to move on to the profile name section, and remember this area up here. It's going to consist of the user's username, then an edit profile button if they are the owner of their profile, of the profile that they're looking at, and that'll take them, if they click on it, it'll take them to the edit page, the edit profile page, I should say. And we're also going to have this gear icon, which is going to include a dialog, which is going to show a dialog with all of these available options. Now, since we need to include the user's username here within profile name section, we want to pass down the current user as a prop. In this case, or I should say the user associated with the profile down on this user prop. For us, it's going to be the default current user. And we also want to pass down the value of isOwner. We want to determine if we're the owner of this profile because we want to show a different button, a different set of buttons here. If we're not the user whose profile that we're looking at, let's just go to a different user's profile. What we're going to see is either a following button if we're currently following them, or we're going to see a follower button if we're unfollowing them, if we're not following them, I should say. So we'll pass down isOwner to profile name section, and remember that we want to pass down both of these props in both places. So we're going to need to duplicate where we're passing our props here to both views. And we're also going to create a dedicated piece of state to display the options menu here. The options menu when we click on that gear icon. So again, this is going to be a Boolean piece of state, and we're going to call the state variable show options menu, since it'll be used for the visibility of this menu, and the setter will be set options menu. Since the gear button is going to be placed within that particular component, we want to pass down a function that's going to enable it to be opened and to be able to update the state. So let's add a function here in profile page, handle options menu click, and all it's going to do is it's going to set the options menu state to true. And we'll pass this down as a prop of the same name to both of our instances of the profile name section component. So let's destructure each of these values within the local component itself. User isOwner and handle options menu click. First of all, we will use profile page styles. We'll use that hook and get classes. But the most challenging thing that we'll need to do within this component is we're going to need to figure out the necessary button to show here, whether it's an edit profile button, a follow button to follow the user whose profile we're looking at, or if we're already following that user. So let's create a local variable called follow button, and we'll create a couple of variables that will hold Boolean values called is following, and this will be set to false, and is follower, and this will be set to false as well. Now we're going to set up this if-else conditional to say, first of all, if is following is true, if we're following a given user, then we want to show the following button. So we'll set follow button to a button component, which we'll import, where we'll set the variant to outlined and the class name to classes.button, and the text here will be following. We'll add an else if to this conditional, and if this user whose profile we're looking at is one who's a follower of us, we'll also show another state that I didn't mention, which is the follow back button. So here we'll set follow button to a button where the variant is contained. The color is primary and the class is the same, but the text here is going to be follow back. And we'll add a final else. If neither of these cases match, then we'll have a follow button just like above, with the variant contained in the color primary and the class button, but the text within it is going to be simply follow. Now as for what this component is going to return, we're going to still have our two hidden components, where for one it's going to be hidden on the breakpoint XS down, and the next for SM up. So for larger screens, it'll contain a section element where its class is going to be username section. And the first thing that we're going to include in this section is the user's username. So we're going to bring in a typography component, and then that's going to have the class username. And we'll insert the username from user.username. Then underneath typography, we're going to add a ternary here to check to see if isOwner is true. If it is, we're going to include a fragment which is going to contain the following. First of all, it's going to include a link here, and within it's going to be our edit profile button. So we'll bring in link. We'll import link from React Router DOM. This is going to be to /accounts/edit. Within that will be a button with the variant outlined and the text edit profile. Now underneath that link we'll have a div, and this is what's going to toggle our dialog, our options menu or options dialog. So onClick is going to be set to handle options menu click, and this div will also have the class name of settings wrapper. Within that we're going to have a gear icon, which we're going to import from our icons file, and the class of this will be classes.settings. Now in the else condition, if we're not looking at our own profile, we're not the owner, we're going to insert our follow button, whatever that is. Now for the smaller view, this is going to be very similar but not exactly the same. We're going to start with a section, and it's not going to have any class, but it will have a div within it, and that's going to have the class username div small. In that we'll have our typography component, so we're just going to copy it from above. This is going to include our username. And then underneath, typography will have a conditional. Now this will be an AND conditional. If we're the owner, then we're going to show our div. That includes our gear icon, so we'll just copy that. And after the closing div tag, the second closing div tag, we're going to add a ternary with isOwner. So if that's true, then we'll include our link. So we'll copy our link from above and insert it there. Otherwise, we'll return our follow button. Now let's save and see what we've got. So it looks very nice. We have all of the details that we'd want here. And if we make our screen a bit smaller, we see our buttons not as wide as it needs to be. So what we'll do is within our ternary here, we're going to set an inline style and make the width 100%, and that should fix our problem. Good. Now we want to create our options menu when we click on this gear button. So we need to create that dialog, and we'll do so again locally. We'll create it at the very bottom of our page file, and we're going to call this options menu. And we'll use profile page styles. And we'll begin by returning a dialog. So we'll import that. And this is going to have the prop open set to true. And for the classes object, it's going to have the underlying class scroll paper set to dialog scroll paper. The class paper will be set to dialog paper. And then it's going to have its transition component, which all dialogs accept, set to zoom. So we'll import zoom. Then within the dialog, we want to show all of our options. So looking back at that, when we look at our menu, we see all of these different choices. So each of these items should accept some text, should have some text, and should be able to perform a given action when we click on it, such as for cancel, which is to close the dialog, or log out, which is going to handle the process of logging us out of the app. So let's create a dedicated options item component that's going to accept both of those values, both of those props, text and on click. And it's just going to return two things. It's going to return within a fragment a button and then a divider underneath, a divider component which we'll need to import. So for the button, it's going to have an inline style where the padding is set to 12 pixels on top and bottom and 8 pixels on the sides. And it's going to have an on-click that's set to the function, the on-click function that's passed through. And then we're going to interpolate the text between the button tags. So here within the dialog tags in options menu, we'll provide all of those different options with options item. So for the first one, we'll set the text to change password, and we'll copy this and paste this in 6 more times. The next will be, we'll have the text of name tag, then authorized apps, then notifications, then privacy and security. And we're going to provide an on-click to these last two options. The first will be log out, and the on-click here is going to take care of showing a dialog which is visible when we actually log out of the app. So you can see right here, you can see that very briefly. So for the on-click, we're first going to add a piece of state, use a piece of state, which will be a Boolean. And this is going to control the visibility of the logout message, the logout pop-up. So this is going to be called show logout message, and the setter will be set logout message. And the function that we're going to pass down to this options item is going to be called handle logout click, and it's going to set logout message to true. Now as for showing it, we're going to include a little conditional here above options item, where if we're showing that message, then we're going to kind of reuse the same dialog component. If we're showing the logout message, then we want to show first a dialog title, which we'll import, and it's going to have the class dialog title. And for the title, it will be logging out. Then still nested within this component, we're going to have a typography component with the color text secondary. And the text itself is going to be, you need to log back in to continue using Instagram. Now we only want to show this dialog title if we're showing the logout message, and therefore are not showing each of these other options. So if we're going to add a conditional and say if not showing logout message, or what we could do here is turn this into a ternary. If we're showing the logout message, we'll show this. Otherwise our options items. And we need to wrap all of them within a single fragment. And we'll pass down to that on click, handle logout click. And then for the last options item, it will just be cancel, and that's going to hide this entire dialog. So we need to pass down to options menu a way to turn our, all the way back in the profile page component, we need to turn show options menu to false. So we'll create another function, handle close menu, and that's going to set options menu back to false. So we'll pass that down as a prop to where we're showing our options menu. Now let's show it at the very bottom, or at least add the conditional at the very bottom, and this will be right before the closing div tag, where we'll say if we're showing the options menu, then we want to return and display the options menu component, to which we're going to pass handle close menu as a prop. Then we'll go there and destructure that handle close menu, and finally pass that down to cancel as this on click prop. So let's save that and see if we can get this working, see if we can display this menu dialog. So when we click on the gear button, our dialog zooms into view, and when we hit cancel, we're able to close it, and when we hit log out, we just see our dialog title with our appropriate text. And we can refresh in order to actually go back to the profile itself, since we don't have a way of closing that dialog just yet when we see that logging out dialog. Now let's test our follow button here, that follow button component, and we'll do so by changing the value of those two variables, is following and is follower. So only one of these can be true at a given time. So if we're following a given user, we'll see, well, first of all, we need to set is owner to false. If we're following a user, we'll see that following button. And now we also want to display a modal if we want to unfollow a given user. So when we click on this, we should see a little dialog that shows the user's information. Let me just log back in. When we're following a user and we click on that again, we'll get a little dialog that asks us whether we really want to unfollow them. So let's display that. Here within profile name section, we'll create a dialog piece of state, again to control its visibility. So we'll call this show unfollow dialog, and the setter set unfollow dialog. So we know how this works. For the following button, we just need to add an onClick, and we're just going to write an inline function here. We're not going to create a separate function within profile name section. Here we want to set unfollow dialog to true, and then down at the very bottom of the JSX that we're returning, we're going to add a conditional where we say show unfollow dialog. If that's true, then we're going to return an unfollow dialog component, which we're going to make. And we're going to kind of preemptively send down an onClose function that's going to take care of closing the dialog from within. So we're just going to pass down the arrow function set unfollow dialog to false. So we will make this, say, above options menu, or actually we'll make it above post count section, so it's pretty close to the profile name section. Once again, we'll use profile page styles. We'll get classes, and we're going to return a dialog with the prop open. For the classes object, we'll set scroll paper to unfollow dialog scroll paper. Then we're going to set onClose to true, and we'll first of all grab the onClose function and the user data that we're getting as props. And the transition component here is going to be zoom as well. Then within the dialog, we'll have a div which will have the class wrapper. The first thing that we'll include up at the top is an avatar of the user, which will have the source coming from user.profileImage. The alt will be user avatar, or we could use a template literal and say user.usernames avatar, and it's going to have the class of avatar. Then outside of this div, we'll have typography, where a line will be set to center. The class will be unfollow dialog text, and the variant will be body2. And then for the text within typography, it'll say unfollow at, and then insert user.username question mark. Do you want to unfollow them? Then we'll add under that a divider, then a button, which will have the class of unfollow button, which will perform the action of unfollowing them. We'll have the text unfollow, and then we can copy this divider and button and paste that in underneath. So we'll have another divider separating the cancel button, and this is going to accept as an onClick our onClose function to close the dialog, and it'll have the class of cancel button, and it'll be black instead of red. So let's save and see what we've got. If we're already following a user and hit the following button again. Oh, and also forgot to mention, to unfollow dialog, we also need to pass down the user. And we want to pass down the user data on this user prop, and we're receiving the user here within the props of profile name section as well. So let's try that one more time, and we'll hit following, and we see, great, we see our user's avatar of who we want to unfollow, or do we want to unfollow them, and then we'll have the choice to do so or cancel and close the dialog. So next we just want to tackle the post count section and the name bio section, and these are pretty easy. So after unfollow dialog, we'll start with the post count section. Again, we want to use profile page styles. Now here, if we look back at any user's profile, we see we want to include their posts, followers, and following. So we're going to need that user data. We'll need to pass down to both instances of, back within the profile page component, to both instances of a post count section, we're going to need to pass down a user prop. And user here is going to be set to default current user. So we'll provide that in both places. And kind of looking ahead, we're going to need to do the same for name bio section, because that's going to include all of their bio information. So we'll just provide the same user prop to name bio section too. Then heading back down to post count section, this is really going to look pretty much the same for both views. It's just going to have a couple of dividers over this area whenever we get down to a mobile breakpoint, and the order is going to change a little bit. So in post count section, we're going to grab or destructure the user prop, and we're going to have an array. We're going to create an array called options. That's going to consist of 3 elements, 3 strings, one called posts, another called followers, and then finally a last one for following for each of those counts. And then we're going to return a fragment where, first of all, we're going to use a hidden component that's going to be hidden on any breakpoint, any size higher than small. And each of these are going to include a divider. So these will be hidden for larger screens. And then between these, between the hidden components, we're going to start with a section. And this will have the class of following section. Then we're going to take these options and map over them. We're going to iterate over them. And for each option, we're going to return a div, which will have the key of option, since these are all different values. And the div is going to have a class of following text. Within that is going to be typography with the class following, let me spell this correctly, following count. And this is where we're going to take the user and use, if we go back to data, we go to default current user, and we can use as a key either followers, following, or posts to get the appropriate value. So we can use the bracket syntax to say user, and then insert the option, whatever that is, post, followers, or following, and then from that get the length, since each of these are arrays. We'll get the number of their elements, of each option's elements, and then underneath typography we're going to have a hidden component. It's going to apply for small, for extra small sizes, and then that's going to include the text of that particular type of data. So we'll just include, we'll interpolate option here. Then we'll add a hidden component for the breakpoint SM and up. And that's going to still have a typography component, but it's going to have the color text secondary. So let's take a look at how that turns out. So looking pretty good, and then we get to a smaller size, and we see we have our dividers on top and bottom, and the word breaks to a separate line. The options text breaks to a separate line. Now for the name bio section, as the last part of our header, we're going to destructure the user prop, and we're going to return the following. First of all, we're going to make sure to use profile page styles, and we're going to return a section with the class section. Then we'll have typography. Remember that this is just basically going to consist of 3 separate lines, one for the name, then another one for the bio, and then underneath we might have a website. These are all really optional. The bio and website are optional for the user. So first we're going to have typography with the class of typography. This is where we'll insert their name. We can copy this, and then we'll have another typography component with no class, and this was going to be for the bio. And then for the last one, we're just going to include a plain A tag, set of A tags, where the href is going to be their website. So that's going to come from, I should say each of these are going to come from user. So we're going to have user.name, user.bio, and user.website. The link is going to come from user.website, that property. And since we want this to open, this link to open in a separate page, we are going to set the following attributes. We're going to set target to blank to do so, to have it open in a separate tab, I should say. And we're going to set rel to no opener, no referrer. Within that, we're also going to have typography where the color is going to be secondary, and the same class typography. This is where we're going to insert the website. Again, set that to user.website. And we'll take a look at this. So great, that looks good. And we see that flips order between small and large sizes. So this is basically the profile header, the header of each of our profile pages, and now we're going to move on to the profile tabs area. And for us, it's not going to consist of all of these tabs, although we might add them a little bit later, say if we were to build onto our app, but primarily they're just going to consist of posts and save, these two tabs. So posts are all the posts that we've made, that we've created ourselves, or another user's created, and again they're showing up as individual grid items, just like we've seen on, for example, our Explore page. So this will be pretty easy to set up. We'll see how to make these tabs that we can toggle, we can go between, and saved posts are ones that we've saved, that we've hit the bookmark button for, the save button for. So we'll see them show up here also as grid items, but if I were to remove this, I refresh, what we'll see is a kind of no content area telling us about saved posts. And we would see the same thing for our post tab had I not already made a post here. And notice what happens when we go to a smaller size. The text with each of these tabs goes away, and we just see the icon, and the active icon, the icon that we're, or the tab that we're currently on, is highlighted in blue. So let's begin by bringing in our profile tabs component. This is going to be from components, profile, profile tabs, and first of all we're going to, within the profile page component up at the top of profile.js, we're going to import profile tabs from components, profile tabs. We're going to add profile tabs to the very bottom. We'll do so directly underneath our conditional to show the options menu, still before the closing div tag. Here we'll insert profile tabs. And we're going to pass down two pieces of information. First of all, the user data, so we can show the appropriate posts, and is owner. So user is going to be set to default current user, and is owner set to is owner. Now heading over to profile tabs, we'll grab both of those props, user and is owner. Now the significance of the is owner value is to determine whether we show the save tab. We're not going to see the save tab for other users. This is only going to be private, and only we can see what we've saved. So we'll grab classes first. We'll build out the structure of this. Again, we're going to know that we're going to need to have two hidden components ahead of time. So we'll start with a fragment, and we'll begin with a surrounding section element with the class section. Then we'll have hidden, and this is going to apply to excess down. This is where we'll show a divider component. Then underneath that hidden component, we'll have another one for the same breakpoint with the same prop. And this is going to use a tabs component. Now this is going to help us determine which tab is active. So we'll create a piece of tab state. And we're just going to call this, we're going to give it an initial value of 0. And we'll give it a kind of nondescript state variable name of value, and the setter will be set value. That's because tabs has a value prop that this is going to be passed to. This is going to be controlled. And whenever this changes, whenever a tab changes, we can add an inline arrow function that has two parameters. The first one we're not going to need to use, but the second one is the value itself. So this is what's going to control setting the value. So in the return we'll set value in state with that new value. Then this is going to be a centered tabs component, and for its classes object it's going to only have one called indicator that's set to tabs indicator. Now within tabs we're going to have an individual tab that will import. This will just be a single tag component. It's going to have an icon associated with it, and this will be a span. We're going to use our sprite sheet, and it's going to have the class of posts icon large. So this is obviously our post icon here. This is the tab for it. It's going to have the label of posts in all caps, and it's going to have the following classes. Root will be set to tab root. The label icon will be tab label icon, and wrapper tab wrapper. Now around the next tab we'll add a conditional only if isOwner is true, or we're going to display this, but we can basically copy the tab and paste it in. Now the class for its icon is going to be saved icon large. The label is going to be saved, but we'll keep all of the same classes that are on the tab component. And then under the hidden tag, underneath the hidden tag, we'll have another hidden component. This will apply to the breakpoint SM up. So this is for a smaller size, and we're going to have tabs once again. We can copy the opening tag of tabs so we don't have to write that again. Now this is going to have a class immediately on it of tabs. It'll still have the same indicator class of tabs indicator, and then it'll have a closing tag. And we'll still have our two tabs within it, our two tab components within it. The second one, again, will include a conditional for that saved tab. But for the first one, this is going to be a little bit different. For its icon, we have one that's going to come from our icons file. So we'll import one called grid icon. And its fill, meaning its color, what color it's filled with, is going to be based conditionally off of the value that we have in state. So for the posts tab, the value is going to be 0. For this tab, for the saved tab, it's going to be 1. So when value is equal to 1, this fill is going to be set to the blue hex code, and the same for posts. And the value associated with each tab is basically just determined by its order. So the fill of this grid icon is going to be determined by comparing value with 0. If it is, then we're going to use the hex code 3897F0, else undefined. Then for its classes object, we'll set root to classes.tab_root. And we can basically copy this and paste it in for our saved tab. but here we're going to compare value to 1. Then finally, the last thing that we'll include for now is another hidden component, our last one, to apply to SM up, and we want to check to see if there are no posts from a given user. If user.posts.length is 0, then we want to include a divider, another divider. So let's save everything and see how that turns out. And I forgot to include hidden. I forgot to import hidden from Material UI. So yep, we see the tab here, and I'm for now going to, back in profile, change isOwner to true. So we can see both of them, posts and saved. So good, we see both of them and we can toggle between them. Obviously we don't see their corresponding content, but we will in a second. And I made a mistake back in profile tabs. I forgot to change the icon. You might have noticed this. For the second tab, this should be the save icon, just like we have for each of our posts. You know, our feed post, our regular post component. So there we go. We see that their fill updates accordingly. Okay, good. Now the next step will be to show their related content. We want to show all of the users' posts and all of their saved posts if they have any. So we're going to create a couple of local components, one called profile posts and another called saved posts. So we'll, before the closing fragment tag, or actually before the closing section tag, we want to add a comparison where if value is equal to 0, we show the profile posts, and if the value is 1, then we show the saved posts. And we want to pass, obviously, the profile user's information down, so we'll provide the user prop on both of these. And we need actually isOwner for profile posts as well. So we'll grab user and isOwner for that. Then we'll use, up the top, use profile tab styles, use profile tabs styles. Easy to get mixed up with use profile page styles. And first we want to add a check to see if a user doesn't have any posts. Again, we mentioned that we want to show some a no content area here instead of just a blank area. So if user.posts.length is 0, we want to return a section with the class profile posts section. Within that, a div with the class no content, and then we're going to include an icon here that's associated with uploading a photo. So this is going to be called upload photo icon. We want it to be a div so it takes up its own line, and we'll have typography here. We'll make sure import typography. We'll have typography, and it will have the variant H4. And if we're the owner, we're going to say upload a photo, else we're going to say no photos. And if the user does have some posts, we're going to return an article element where we have the class article. Within that, a div with the class post container, and this should look familiar to you. Then we'll take user.post.map. For each post, we're going to return a grid post, which we'll pass the key to and include post ID as that key and the post prop. We'll pass down all the post data, and we will make sure to import grid post from one level up, and then go into shared grid post. Then for saved posts, we'll again use profile tabs styles. And we can copy here the no content, what we have for the no content of profile posts. And that's all we're going to return right now. We don't have any saved posts associated with our user in our data file, so we're just going to show a no content no matter what. So technically we don't have to pass down the user data there just yet, but we will. So here for its section, it's going to be called save posts section as the class. We're still going to have the div with the class of no content, and then for the icon, this will be the save photo icon, where for typography we'll have the text save, and then another typography with a line set to center. And if we look at the Instagram site, we'll see that the text for that is the following, which we can copy. Save photos and videos that you want to see again. No one is notified, and only you can see what you've saved. So let's take a look at that. Okay, great. We have all of the user's posts in our post tab. We switch over to save, and we just see that no content area there.